They called me defective throughout my entire life, and by the age of 19, after 3 physicians had examined my frail body and delivered their verdict, I had begun to believe them. My name is Thomas Beaumont Callahan. I am 19 years old, and my body has perpetually been a betrayal, a ledger of failures inscribed in bone and muscle that never formed as they should. I arrived premature in January of 1840, coming 2 months early during one of the coldest winters Mississippi had witnessed in decades. My mother, Sarah Beaumont Callahan, went into labor without warning at a dinner party my father was hosting for visiting judges and planters. The midwife who attended her, an enslaved woman named Mama Ruth, who had delivered half the white babies in the county, took a single look at me and shook her head. "Judge Callahan," she informed my father, "this child will not survive the night. He is too small. His breathing is too shallow. You should best prepare your wife for a loss." But my mother, delirious from fever and exhaustion, refused to accept that prognosis. "He will live," she whispered, pressing my tiny form to her chest. "I know he will. I can feel his heart. It is weak, but it fights." She was correct. I survived that first night, and the next, and the next. Yet survival is not the same as thriving. At 1 month old, I weighed scarcely 6 pounds. At 6 months, I still could not hold up my own head. When I was 1 year old, as other babies stood and took their first steps, I could barely sit upright without support. The doctors my father summoned from Natchez, from Vicksburg, from as far as New Orleans, all delivered the same judgment. My premature birth had stunted my development in permanent ways that would affect me for life. My mother passed when I was 6 years old, a victim of the yellow fever epidemic that ravaged Mississippi in 1846. I remember her lying in bed, her skin the hue of old parchment, her eyes yellowed and distant. She called me to her bedside the day before she died. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible, "you will face challenges your entire life. People will underestimate you. They will pity you. They will dismiss you. But you possess something more valuable than physical strength. You have your mind, your heart, your soul. Do not let anyone make you feel less than whole." She died the following morning. I did not fully comprehend her words until years later. My father, Judge William Callahan, was a formidable man in every way I was not. 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, with a voice that could silence a courtroom in a single word. He had built his fortune from nothing. Beginning as a poor lawyer from Alabama, he married into the Beaumont family's modest plantation and, through shrewd investments and strategic land acquisitions, transformed those initial 800 acres into an 8,000-acre cotton empire. Callahan Plantation sat upon the high bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River, 15 miles south of Natchez, on what was considered the richest soil in the South. The main house was a Greek Revival mansion my father had constructed in 1835. 2 stories of white, painted brick with massive Doric columns, wide galleries on both levels, and tall windows that caught the river breeze. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from 15-foot ceilings, imported furniture-filled rooms vast enough to host balls for 100 guests, and Persian rugs covered floors of polished heart pine. Behind the main house stretched the working plantation, the cotton gin, the blacksmith shop, the carpentry workshop, the smokehouse, the laundry, the kitchen building, the overseer's house, and beyond all that, the quarters, rows of small cabins where 300 enslaved people lived in conditions that stood in sharp contrast to the mansion's luxury. I grew up within this world of extreme wealth built upon extreme brutality, though as a child I did not grasp the full implications. I was tutored at home by a succession of teachers my father hired. I was too frail for the rough and tumble of school, too sickly to board at the academies where other planters' sons were sent. Instead, I learned Greek and Latin, mathematics and literature, history and philosophy within the quiet of my father's library. By age 19, I stood 5 feet 2 inches tall, the height of a boy entering puberty, not a young man. My frame was slight, weighing perhaps 110 pounds, with bones so delicate that Dr. Harrison once remarked I had the skeleton of a bird. My chest caved inward slightly, a condition the doctors called pectus excavatum, the result of ribs that had never properly formed. My hands trembled constantly, a fine tremor that made simple tasks like writing or holding a teacup an exercise in concentration. My eyesight was terrible, requiring thick spectacles that magnified my pale blue eyes to an almost comical size. Without them, the world was a blur. My voice had never fully deepened, remaining in that awkward range between boy and man. My hair was fine and light brown, already thinning despite my youth. My skin was pale, almost translucent, revealing every vein beneath the surface. But the worst part, the part that would ultimately define my fate, was my complete lack of masculine development. I had no facial hair to speak of, just a few wispy strands on my upper lip that I shaved more from hope than necessity. My body was hairless, smooth as a child's, and the doctor's examinations had confirmed what my father suspected. My reproductive organs were severely underdeveloped, rendering me sterile. The examinations began shortly after my 18th birthday in January of 1858. My father had arranged for me to meet a potential bride, Martha Henderson, the daughter of a wealthy planter from Port Gibson. The meeting was a disaster. Martha took one look at me and could not conceal her disgust. She made polite conversation for exactly 15 minutes before claiming a headache and departing. I overheard her telling her mother as they left, "Father cannot seriously expect me to marry that child. He looks as if he would break in half on our wedding night." After that humiliation, my father summoned Dr. Harrison. Dr. Samuel Harrison was Natchez' most prominent physician, a Yale-educated man in his 50s who specialized in what he termed matters of masculine health and heredity. He arrived at Callahan Plantation on a humid February morning, carrying a leather medical bag and an air of clinical detachment. My father left us alone in his study. Dr. Harrison had me undressed completely, then conducted the most humiliating hour of my life. He measured me: height, weight, chest circumference, limb length. He examined every inch of my body, making notes in a small leather journal. He paid particular attention to my groin, manipulating my underdeveloped testicles, commenting aloud on their size and consistency. Significantly below normal, he muttered while writing, prepubertal in appearance and texture. When he finished, he had me dress and called my father back into the room. "Judge Callahan," Dr. Harrison said, settling into a leather chair, "I will be direct. Your son's condition is not merely constitutional frailty. He suffers from what we call hypogonadism, a failure of the sexual organs to develop properly. This was likely caused by his premature birth and subsequent developmental delays." My father's face remained impassive. What does this mean for his future? For marriage? For the continuation of the family line? Dr. Harrison glanced at me, then back at my father. "Judge, the likelihood of your son producing offspring is virtually non-existent. The testicular tissue is insufficient for spermatogenesis, the production of viable seed. His hormone production is clearly deficient, as evidenced by his lack of secondary sexual characteristics. Even if he were to marry, consummation might prove difficult, and conception would be, in my professional opinion, impossible." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Impossible. My father was silent for a long moment. "You are absolutely certain?" "As certain as medical science allows. I have seen perhaps a dozen cases like this in my career. None produced children." "I see. Thank you, Dr. Harrison. I will have your payment sent to your office." After the doctor left, my father poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and stared out the window at the river. "Father, I am sorry," I said quietly. He did not turn around. For what? For being born early? For being sickly? For being... He trailed off, took a long drink. "Not your fault, Thomas. But it is our reality." Yet my father was not satisfied with one opinion. A week later, Dr. Jeremiah Blackwood arrived from Vicksburg. He was younger than Dr. Harrison, more aggressive in his examination, rougher in his handling of my body. But his conclusion was identical: severe hypogonadism with associated sterility. The condition is permanent and untreatable. The third doctor came from New Orleans in March. Dr. Antoine Mirier was a Creole physician who had studied in Paris and spoke with a thick French accent. He was the gentlest of the 3, apologizing for the invasive nature of the examination, but his verdict was the same. "Jesus da sole, but your son, he cannot father children. The development, it is arrested. Nothing can be done." 3 doctors, 3 examinations, 3 identical conclusions. Thomas Beaumont Callahan was sterile, unfit for breeding, incapable of continuing the family line. The news spread through Mississippi's planter society with the speed and thoroughness of gossip among people who had nothing better to do than discuss each other's business. My father made no effort to keep it secret. What would be the point? Any woman who agreed to marry me would need to know. Better to be honest up front than face recriminations later. The Hendersons withdrew their daughter from consideration immediately. The Rutherfords, who had expressed interest in introducing me to their younger daughter, sent a polite note declining. The Prestons, the Montgomerys, the Fairfaxes, all the prominent families who might have overlooked my physical frailty for the sake of the Callahan fortune, suddenly found reasons why their daughters were unsuitable or already promised elsewhere. But it was not merely the private rejections that wounded. It was the public comments. I overheard Mrs. Harrison at church in April. "Such a pity about the Callahan boy. The judge has all that wealth and no proper heir to leave it to. Makes one wonder what the point is." At a dinner party my father hosted in May, one of the guests, drunk on fine whiskey, said loudly enough for me to hear from the hallway, "It is nature's way, is it not? The weak ones are not supposed to reproduce. Keeps the stock healthy." A visiting planter from Louisiana, examining a horse my father was selling, commented, "Fine animal. Strong lines, good conformation, proven stud. Not like that son of yours, eh? Sometimes breeding just fails." At each comment was a knife, but I had learned to show no reaction. What would be the point? They were right in the terms they understood. I was defective merchandise, a failed investment, a dead end branch on the family tree. My father withdrew into himself during the spring and summer of 1858. He still ran the plantation with his usual efficiency, still served as county judge, still attended social functions. But at home, he was increasingly distant, spending long hours in his study, with bourbon and legal documents, working on something he would not discuss with me. I retreated into books. My father's library contained over 2,000 volumes, and I had read most of them by age 19. I particularly loved philosophy and poetry, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Keats, Shelley, Byron. I found solace in words written by men who had contemplated suffering, mortality, and the human condition. I also began exploring books my father did not know were in his library, volumes that previous owners had left behind or that had been accidentally included in lots purchased at estate sales. These included abolitionist literature that was technically illegal in Mississippi, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, published in 1845, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, published in 1852, essays by William Lloyd Garrison and other Northern abolitionists, I read these forbidden books late at night, when the house was quiet, and they disturbed me profoundly. I had grown up accepting slavery as natural, as ordained by God, as beneficial to both master and slave. The idea that enslaved people were inferior, childlike, incapable of self-governance. This was what everyone around me believed and taught. But these books presented a different picture. Frederick Douglass wrote with an intelligence and eloquence that matched any white author I had read. He described the brutality of slavery, the whippings, the family separations, the sexual exploitation, the psychological torture of being treated as property. Uncle Tom's Cabin, despite being fiction, depicted slavery's horrors with devastating emotional impact. I began noticing things I had previously ignored. The scars on the backs of field hands, the way enslaved people's expressions went blank and subservient when white people approached. The children who looked suspiciously like my father's overseers. The women who disappeared from the fields for months, then returned without the babies they had obviously carried. But I did nothing with these observations. I was too weak, too dependent, too compromised by my own comfort to challenge the system. I told myself I was different from other slaveholders, that I treated enslaved people with more kindness. But kindness does not make slavery less evil. It only makes the enslaver feel better about participating in it. In September of 1858, my father made another attempt at finding me a bride. He contacted families outside Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia. He lowered his standards, approaching families of lesser wealth and social standing. He offered increasingly generous dowries, guaranteeing that any woman who married me would live in luxury and want for nothing. The responses were variations on a theme. Thank you for your generous offer, but Caroline is already promised to another. We appreciate your interest, but we do not feel it would be a suitable match. While your son seems a fine young man, we are looking for a situation with different prospects. That last one was particularly cruel. Different prospects was a polite way of saying a husband who can give us grandchildren. By December of 1858, my father had stopped trying. We ate dinner together in silence most nights. The clink of silver on china was the only sound in the massive dining room. Sometimes he would look at me with an expression I could not quite read. Disappointment, certainly, but also something like desperation. The explosion came in March of 1859. It was late evening, and my father had been drinking more than usual. I was in the library reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius when he burst in. Thomas, we need to talk. I set down the book. Yes, father. He sat down heavily, bourbon sloshing in his glass. I am 58 years old. I could die tomorrow or live another 20 years. But either way, I will die eventually. And when I do, what happens to all this? He gestured vaguely at the room, the house, the plantation beyond. The estate will go to our nearest male relative, I suppose. Cousin Robert in Alabama. Cousin Robert, my father spat, is an incompetent drunk who has lost 2 small plantations to bad debt. He would sell this place within a year and drink away the profits. Everything I have built, everything my father built before me, gone. I am sorry, father. I know this is not the situation you wanted. Sorry does not solve the problem. He stood up, began pacing. For 18 months I have tried everything. 18 months of searching for a wife who would accept you despite your condition. No one will. No one wants a husband who cannot produce heirs. That is the reality, I know. So I have had to think creatively, very creatively, about solutions that push the boundaries of convention. Something in his tone made me uneasy. What do you mean? He stopped pacing, looked directly at me. Why, I'm giving you Delilah. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. I am sorry. What? Delilah? The field hand. I am giving her to you as your companion. Your wife in practical terms. The words made no sense. Father, you cannot possibly be suggesting. I am not suggesting. I am telling you what is going to happen. His voice was hard now, the voice he used in court when pronouncing sentence. No white woman will marry you. That is established fact. But the Callahan line needs to continue. The plantation needs heirs. Even if those heirs are unconventional. The full horror of what he was proposing hit me. You want me to, with a slave woman? Father, that's, even if I could, which the doctors say I can't. That is not how inheritance works. A child from a slave woman would not be your heir. They would be property. Unless I free them. Unless I legally adopt them. Unless I structure my will very carefully. Which, as a judge and lawyer, I am uniquely qualified to do. This is insane. This is necessary. He sat down again, leaning forward. Thomas, listen to me. I have thought this through from every angle. You cannot produce children. The doctors were unanimous about that. But children can be produced on your behalf. Delilah is strong, healthy, intelligent. I will arrange for her to be bred with a suitable male from another plantation. Strong stock. Proven fertility. Good physical specimens. The children she bears will legally be mine through documentation I will create. When I die, I will them to you, along with papers freeing them and establishing them as your adopted heirs. They will inherit everything. You are talking about breeding human beings like livestock. I am talking about ensuring the continuation of this family and this plantation. Is it unconventional? Yes. Is it legally complex? Absolutely. But it is possible and it solves our problem. It is not my problem. I stood up, my hands trembling more than usual. Father, what you are describing is evil. You want to use a woman's body without her consent to produce children who will be manipulated through legal fictions into becoming heirs. You are treating people like breeding stock. Like animals? They are animals in the eyes of the law. His voice rose to match mine. Thomas, I understand you have been reading those abolitionist books. Yes, I know about them. I am not blind. You have filled your head with sentimental nonsense about the humanity of slaves. But the legal reality is that they are property. I own Delilah the same way I own this house or that chair. And I am choosing to use her in a way that solves a problem. And what does Delilah think about this? She will do what she is told. She is property, Thomas. Her opinion is irrelevant. Something in me snapped. I had spent my entire life deferring to my father's authority, accepting his decisions, trying to make up for being a disappointing son. But this was too much. No. The word came out quietly but firmly. My father blinked. What did you say? I said. No, I will not be part of this. If you want to implement this obscene breeding scheme, you will do it without my participation or cooperation. You ungrateful. He stood up, his face reddening. Do you have any idea what I have sacrificed for you? The opportunities I have lost because I had to focus on finding solutions for my defective son, the social embarrassment of having an heir who cannot perform the one basic function required of him. I did not ask to be born this way. And I did not ask for a son who would end the family line. He threw his glass, which shattered against the fireplace. I am trying to find a solution, and you are throwing it back in my face out of some misguided moral superiority you learned from abolitionist propaganda. It is not propaganda to say that people should not be bred like animals. Get out. Get out of my sight. I left the library, my heart pounding, my whole body shaking. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed, trying to process what had just happened. My father wanted to use an enslaved woman as breeding stock to produce heirs that would legally be manipulated into inheriting his plantation, and he saw nothing wrong with this plan. In fact, he thought it was a clever solution to an intractable problem. I could not sleep that night. I kept thinking about Delilah, about the life my father was planning for her without her knowledge or consent. I had seen her around the plantation, of course. She was hard to miss. Delilah was 24 years old, nearly 6 feet tall, with a powerful build from years of fieldwork. She had skin the color of polished mahogany, high cheekbones, and eyes that held an intelligence she had learned to hide in the presence of white people. She was what the overseers called a prime field hand, strong enough to pick 300 pounds of cotton a day, healthy enough to work through the brutal Mississippi summers without collapsing. I had heard the overseers talking about her. That Delilah's worth 3 regular hands. Never gets sick, never complains, works like a machine. But I had also heard darker comments. Shame to waste breeding potential like that on field work. A woman built like that should be having babies every year. Now, my father wanted to ensure that breeding potential was exploited. I could not let that happen. But what could I do? I had no authority over the plantation. I was 19 years old, physically weak, financially dependent on my father. I could not free Delilah. I did not own her. And even if I did, the legal process was complex and expensive. I could not help her escape. I barely knew her, had no connections to the Underground Railroad, and would not know the first thing about arranging an escape for a fugitive slave. But I could not do nothing. The next morning, still shaking from the confrontation and lack of sleep, I made a decision. I needed to warn Delilah at minimum. She deserved to know what my father was planning. The quarters were located a quarter-mile behind the main house, down a dirt path lined with ancient oak trees. I had rarely visited them before. It was not proper for the master's son to mingle with the enslaved. The few times I had been, there were during Christmas distributions, when my father would hand out extra rations and cheap gifts to the people who made his wealth possible. The quarters consisted of 20 small cabins arranged in 2 rows. Each cabin housed between 6 and 10 people in conditions that contrasted sharply with the mansion's luxury. Rough pine plank walls, dirt floors, a single fireplace for heating and cooking, 1 or 2 small windows with wooden shutters but no glass. It was mid-morning on a Tuesday, which meant most of the field hands were out working. Only a few people were around. An elderly woman tending a cook fire, some children too young to work, a man with a bandaged leg sitting on a cabin step. They all stared at me as I walked past. It was not common for white people to visit the quarters, except the overseer on his rounds, or my father on inspection tours. A frail young white man in fine clothes walking alone through the quarters. I must have looked completely out of place. I asked the elderly woman which cabin belonged to Delilah. She looked at me suspiciously. "Why are you asking after Delilah, young master?" "I need to speak with her. It is important. She out in the fields. Won't be back till sundown." "I will wait." The woman's eyes narrowed, but she pointed to the 3rd cabin in the 2nd row. "That's hers. But I don't know what business you got with her." I spent the day in uncomfortable limbo. I could not return to the main house. My father and I were not speaking. I could not wait in Delilah's cabin. That would be completely inappropriate. So I walked the grounds of the plantation, avoiding areas where my father might be, trying to formulate what I would say to Delilah when she returned. The sun was setting when I saw the field hands returning. They walked in loose groups, exhausted from 10 hours of labor under the March sun. Delilah was easy to spot. She was a head taller than most of the others, walking with a straight, back posture despite obvious fatigue. She saw me standing near her cabin and stopped. "Master Thomas." The other field hands stared, whispering to each other. This was highly unusual. The master's son waiting at a slave cabin. "Delilah, I need to speak with you. It is important." "May I?" I gestured toward her cabin. She glanced at the other workers, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." We entered the cabin. It was a single room, about 12 by 14 feet, with a dirt floor and rough plank walls. A fireplace occupied one wall, cold now in the mild evening. 3 rough wooden pallets served as beds. Delilah shared the cabin with 2 other women who worked in the laundry. There was a crude table, 2 stools, a few cooking pots, and some clothing hanging from pegs on the wall. This was where 3 human beings lived. The contrast between this and my bedroom in the mansion, with its 4-poster bed, imported furniture, soft carpets, and walls lined with bookshelves, was staggering. Delilah stood uncertainly in the middle of the room. "Is something wrong, Master Thomas? Where to begin? How do you tell someone that your father is planning to use her as breeding stock?" "Delilah, I need to tell you something my father is planning. Something that involves you." Her expression became carefully neutral. The look enslaved people adopted when dealing with white people who might mean danger. "Yes, sir." I told her everything, about my sterility, about my father's desperation for heirs, about his plan to breed her with a male slave from another plantation, about the legal machinations that would turn her children into my adopted heirs. As I spoke, I watched her face cycle through shock, horror, and then a kind of weary resignation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Finally," she said, "so the judge plans to use me like a broodmare." "Yes. And I wanted you to know. I wanted to warn you so you could, I don't know, prepare yourself. Resist if possible. Though I know that is almost impossible given your situation." "Why?" She looked at me directly now, fear temporarily overcome by curiosity. "Why are you telling me this, Master Thomas? Why do you care what happens to me?" It was a fair question. Why did I care? I had lived my entire life benefiting from slavery without questioning it. I had worn clothes made by enslaved people, eaten food prepared by enslaved people, lived in luxury built on enslaved labor. What made this different? Because what my father is planning is wrong. Not just morally wrong in some abstract sense, but practically, specifically wrong in a way I cannot ignore anymore. "You think slavery's wrong?" There was skepticism in her voice. I struggled for words. "I think I have been reading too much lately. Books that make me question things I have always accepted. And when my father laid out his plan, when he talked about you like you were livestock to be bred for his purposes, something in me could not accept it. But you still own slaves. Your father still owns me?" "Yes. And I do not have an answer for that contradiction. I am complicit in a system I am starting to understand as evil. But I could not let my father's plan happen without at least warning you." Delilah sat down on one of the stools, suddenly looking exhausted. "Master Thomas, I appreciate the warning. Truly. But what am I supposed to do with this information? I cannot refuse. If the judge orders me bred, I will be bred. If I resist, I will be whipped until I comply, or sold to someone worse, or killed. There is no escape from this. There might be." The words were out before I had fully thought them through. She looked up. "What?" "There might be a way out. I have been thinking about it all day. If you were to escape. Escape to where? We are in Mississippi. There are slave patrols everywhere. I have no papers, no money, no knowledge of the roads north. And I am a 6-foot-tall black woman. I am not exactly inconspicuous. I would be caught within a day and sold south, probably to a Louisiana sugar plantation where I would be worked to death within a few years. What if you had papers? What if you had money? What if you had someone to travel with who could deflect suspicion?" She stared at me. "Master Thomas, What are you suggesting? I am suggesting. I took a deep breath. I am suggesting that maybe we both leave together. We go north. I have money. My mother left me a trust fund I can access. Not a fortune, but enough to get us started somewhere. I can forge travel passes in my father's handwriting. We take a wagon and supplies, and we just go. You cannot be serious.
I am completely serious.
Master Thomas, if we are caught, do you know what would happen? You would be imprisoned for slave theft. I would be killed. They do not just whip runaway slaves in Mississippi. They make examples of them. Public hanging, sometimes worse. I know, but if we succeed, if we somehow make it north, then what? You would be throwing away everything. Your inheritance, your social position, your family name. You would be poor. You would be an outcast. And for what? To help one slave escape when your father owns 300. It was the fundamental question. And I did not have a good answer except the truth. Because I cannot save 300 people. But maybe I can save one. Maybe I can stop one evil thing from happening. And maybe that is better than doing nothing. Why me? You do not even know me. Because you are the one my father is planning to hurt. Because I cannot stop him from continuing slavery, but I can try to stop him from breeding you like an animal. And because I hesitated, because I think maybe we both need to escape, you from slavery, me from a life of complicity in a system I am starting to realize I cannot morally accept. Delilah studied me with those intelligent eyes that had been trained to hide their intelligence.
You really mean this? Yes.
You would give up everything to help me escape?
Yes.
Even though you barely know me, even though I am just one slave among millions, even though it might not make any real difference in the grand scheme. Yes, because it would make a difference to you. And right now, that feels like the only thing I can actually control. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, I could hear other enslaved people moving around, preparing evening meals, settling in for the night. The sun had fully set now, and the cabin was lit only by faint moonlight through the window. Finally, Delilah said, "If we do this, and I am not saying yes yet, I am just saying if, we would need to be smart about it. We would need to plan carefully. The judge has connections everywhere in Mississippi. He would send people after us. I know. And we would need to move fast. If he is planning to bring in a male slave to breed me with, that could happen any day. When would you want to leave? Give me 2 days to think about it. To prepare what little I have. To say goodbye to people in a way that does not alert suspicion." She stood up. "Master Thomas, I do not fully understand why you are doing this. Part of me thinks this is some kind of trap or cruel joke. But if you are sincere, if you really mean to help me escape, then I will take that chance, because you are right. What your father is planning is worse than the risk of running. I am sincere. I swear it. Then we leave in 2 days, Thursday night, after everyone is asleep. Meet me at the stable at midnight. Bring money, supplies, and those forged travel passes. I will bring what little I have." I nodded. Thursday night, midnight. She walked to the cabin door, opened it, then turned back. "Master Thomas, if we do this, if we make it north, what then? What do you expect from me?" "Nothing. I expect nothing except that you would be free. What you do with that freedom is entirely your choice. You are not doing this expecting me to be grateful in certain ways, expecting me to be your mistress or companion or... No, absolutely not. I am doing this because it is right, or at least less wrong than doing nothing. That is all." She studied me for another moment, then nodded. "Thursday night. Do not be late. And do not change your mind." I left the quarters and walked back to the mansion in the dark, my heart pounding. What had I just agreed to? I was planning to steal my father's property. Because that is what Delilah was in the eyes of the law, property, and flee north with her. If we were caught, I would be imprisoned. Delilah would likely be killed. But if we succeeded, one person would be free. One woman would not be forced into the breeding scheme my father had planned. It was not saving the world. It was not ending slavery. But it was something. The next 2 days were agony. I avoided my father as much as possible, taking meals in my room, claiming illness. He did not push the issue. We were still angry with each other, and he likely assumed I needed time to come around to his plan. I used those 2 days to prepare. I went to the bank in Natchez and withdrew nearly all of my trust fund. $800, a substantial sum. I packed a bag with clothes, books, and necessities. I studied maps of Mississippi and the roads north. I practiced my father's signature on travel passes, getting the loops and flourishes exactly right. I also wrote letters. One to my father explaining why I was leaving. One to Dr. Harrison thanking him for his professional care. One to the few friends I had had over the years, saying goodbye. The letter to my father was the hardest. Father, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I am leaving Mississippi, and I will not be returning. I know this will anger you, disappoint you, and perhaps hurt you. For that, I am sorry. But I cannot be part of your plan for Delilah. I cannot participate in a scheme that treats human beings as breeding stock. You raised me to value education, reason, and moral principle. The education you provided has led me to conclusions you will not like. Slavery is evil, and our participation in it is wrong. I am not asking you to understand or approve. I am simply telling you that I have made my choice. The Callahan line may end with me, but it will end with whatever dignity I can salvage, rather than continue through the moral bankruptcy of your breeding scheme. I hope someday you will understand. Your son, Thomas. I sealed the letter and left it on my desk. Thursday night arrived. I could not eat dinner. I lay in bed, fully clothed, listening to the house settle into sleep. My father retired to his room around 10. The servants finished their evening duties by 11. By 11:30, the mansion was silent. At 11:45, I grabbed my bag, crept downstairs, and slipped out through the kitchen door. The stable was dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through gaps in the walls. I hitched up one of the smaller wagons, a 2-horse rig we used for local travel. I loaded my bag, some food I had stolen from the kitchen, blankets, and a canteen of water. At exactly midnight, Delilah appeared. She carried a small bundle. Everything she owned in the world, probably. Some clothes, maybe a few personal items. That was it. 24 years of life reduced to one small bundle. You came, she said quietly. Did you think I would not? I was not sure. Part of me thought this was all a dream or a trick. It is neither. Are you ready? She looked back at the quarters visible in the distance. As ready as I will ever be. We climbed into the wagon. I took the reins. I had driven wagons before, though not often. Delilah sat beside me, her bundle in her lap. Where are we going? She asked as we started moving. Northeast to start. We will avoid Natchez. Too many people who know me. We will head toward Vicksburg, then into Tennessee. From there, we will work our way to Ohio. Cincinnati has a large free black community. We can disappear there. That is at least 400 miles. Closer to 500. It will take us 2 weeks, maybe more. We will travel mostly at night, rest during the day in wooded areas off the main roads. You have thought this through. I had 2 days. I did my best. We rode in silence for a while. The plantation fell away behind us, and soon we were on the main road heading northeast. The night was clear, the moon bright enough to see by. Every sound made my heart race. Was that a patrol? Was that someone following us? But it was just wind animals, the normal sounds of a Mississippi night. After an hour, Delilah spoke again. Thomas, can I call you Thomas? Of course. We are not master and slave anymore. We are just two people trying to get north. Thomas, I need to ask you something honestly. Why are you really doing this? And I do not want the noble answer about stopping one evil. I want the real reason. I thought about that as the horses plodded on. The real reason. I think I have spent my entire life being told I am defective. That I am less than a real man because my body does not work